Hey students, hope you all are doing well. Hope everybody's staying safe, enjoying your quarantine time. Wanted to give you all a brief rundown of your guided readings for this week, help you out a little bit. I'll be posting this stuff to Facebook. You can also subscribe to this YouTube channel to keep up to date with the videos that I'll be posting for y'all. So I believe that we're starting with section 3 of your guided readings on the civil rights movement for this week. So we're going to start off with the Freedom Riders in 1961. This is going to be a movement to protest the discrimination on buses in the South. This was a group of white and black students, and they would get on the buses, all ride around together, protesting the kind of unfair aspects of racial discrimination and segregation on these public buses. These groups of students were actually attacked by white supremacists in Anniston and Birmingham, Alabama. And this gets the federal government involved. So the Attorney General, John Kennedy's brother, Robert Kennedy, orders the bus companies to continue carrying the Freedom Riders even after the attacks take place. And the president at the time, John Kennedy, he sends 400 U.S. Marshals to protect the Freedom Riders, and he calls for the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, to ban segregation of travel facilities. All right, so this includes the buses, bus stops, bus stations, lunch counters, bathrooms, all of it. All right. So a year later, in 1962, we have our first African-American student who's admitted to the University of Mississippi in Oxford. It actually takes the federal government getting involved to get him to go there. The governor of Mississippi was not going to allow James Meredith, which is the student's name. He was not going to allow Meredith to attend the University of Mississippi. JFK gets the federal marshals involved, and they protect Meredith and allow him to attend classes there at the University of Mississippi in 1962. A year later, in 1963, Martin Luther King is working in Birmingham to try to desegregate the entire city. There are protests, peaceful protests. You know, Martin Luther King was nonviolence, civil disobedience is what he called it. The cops come out, fire hoses, dogs, tear gas, and all this stuff ends up on national TV. So in response to kind of the public outcry after they've seen these videos, the officials in Birmingham eventually do desegregate the city, and this isn't something that happens overnight. It is a process. August of 1963, of that same year, 250,000 activists, including Martin Luther King, march to Washington, D.C. to urge Congress to pass the what would become the Civil Rights Act of 1964 a year later. This is going to outlaw discrimination based on race, sex, religion, and national origin. Okay, a huge part of the civil rights movement is voting rights. If you remember, your vote is your voice. So African Americans in the South, if they're denied the right to vote, they're also denied a voice. You can't really change anything in America unless you vote, unless you get somebody who thinks like you do in that public office, who has the power to enact change. So we're going to have two big events. Freedom Summer in Mississippi is going to be a big drive. Lots of students are going to come down from the north, and they're going to try to get as many people registered to vote, legally registered to vote in Mississippi as possible, African Americans. Also, the Selma March, Selma, Alabama, Bloody Sunday, it's sometimes called. But this was organized by Martin Luther King, and it was a group of people marching from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery to protest the unfair voting regulations there in Alabama. And again, the cops show up. There's dogs, there's tear gas, there's billy clubs, and you know, these protesters, they're not violent. They're just walking down the street. They're dressed very nicely, fine, upstanding citizens of America, and it ends up on national TV. So you've got Martin Luther King, these 300 followers, they're getting the snot beat out of them by these crazy cops. There's German shepherds everywhere. There's tear gas flowing around, and it's on TV. So you have, again, a national outcry. This is going to lead directly to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And remember, those voting rights are so important when it comes to enacting change as far as the civil rights movement goes. All right, so that's kind of the gist of that section 3. I'm going to start section 4 now. It kicks off with with the difference between de facto and de jure segregation. An easy way to remember this: de jure segregation, it sounds like jury. Okay, so jury, law. De jure segregation is by law. That one's pretty easy to combat. You just change the laws, right? De facto segregation is a little bit different. It is segregation or discrimination based on practices and customs. All right, so you can't just change the laws. You have to change people's ideas. You have to change their beliefs, and that can be a lot more difficult than just writing a new law. All right, so in the post-Second World War America, a lot of the whites, remember, the suburbs are developing. So a lot of the whites are leaving the cities and they're moving to the suburbs. We have these great highways now. Everybody has a car in the 50s. So lots of whites living in the suburbs, which leaves minorities, the poor, African Americans living in the cities. And the cities start to kind of crumble around them. They're left in these kind of decaying city slums. They have poor education opportunities. They don't have a whole lot of opportunities for good jobs. All right. So this leads to violence. You have violence erupting in cities. And we have some different ideas, kind of differing from Martin Luther King's ideas of nonviolence and civil disobedience. All right. There's this guy named Malcolm X. He was a member of the Nation of Islam. And this is just a group of African-American Muslims in America. He claims that whites are responsible for the African-American situation. I don't know of anybody who can really argue with that. He urges them to fight when they're attacked. So he says this nonviolent stuff is not really getting us anywhere. We need to stand up and we need to demand our rights as American citizens. By 1965, Malcolm X has kind of begun to change his mind. He's kind of moving back towards the old ideas of nonviolence and social disobedience. Stokely Carmichael was another one of these guys who had some different ideas about the civil rights movement. He really kicks off the Black Power movement. He encourages African Americans to take pride in themselves. He encourages them to take up leadership positions. This leads directly to the Black Panthers. You might remember them from Forrest Gump. The Black Panthers are a militant group, meaning, big, scary, burly guys, guns. They're going to be against police brutality. All right. The year 1968, both Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy are assassinated. All right. So we have two major players in the civil rights movement who are eliminated. Lyndon Johnson has taken over as president after Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas in 1963. And he calls on the Kerner Commission to figure out what's causing all these problems. Well, the Kerner Commission comes back and they say white racism is the problem. Duh. All right. Also in 1968, we have another Civil Rights Act passed, the Civil Rights Act of 1968. And this is going to ban discrimination within housing. Okay. So you can see there's some different ideas about civil rights, but it's largely going to revolve around those voting rights. If you can get voting rights to these people, they can change America themselves. That's what's so beautiful about a democracy. These brief rundowns, obviously I've skipped over a lot. I haven't talked about a whole lot of stuff. But these brief rundowns should help you with your guided readings. If you need any help, please email me. Keep in touch. We're going to be taking that stuff electronically. Anything that you can submit to me, share it through OneDrive. You can also bring the stuff up here and drop it off at the school in person. It'll make its way to my box, and I will get y'all some points for it. Okay. Keep up the hard work. Everybody stay safe. and I'll talk to you guys next week.